For today's video, we will speak on the story of Roy Jones Jr. and Bernard Hopkins. If you like me, you grew up playing Fight Night, and these two were both graced the cover of the game at one point, showing that these two were at the top of boxing in the late 90s to the early 2000s era. And if you're like me, you also did a lot of what if fights on that game too, even the fights that might have actually happened. One of my greatest hits was Roy Jones Jr. versus Bernard Hopkins. And if you remember, you know that Bernard Hopkins was, sometimes be put into the light heavyweight division, the same as Jones. And I always wanted to know how they would match up at the peak of their powers, because to me, we never got that prime versus prime matchup. But they did have an actual rivalry in two actual fights. So let's take a deep dive. Coming into their first meeting, Roy Jones would have a clean record of 21 wins and no losses, with 20 of those wins being by knockout. Being one of the top prospects in boxing, the biggest knock on Jones was his perceived lack of competition. And after a first round body shot KO of Glenn Wolfe, Jones would let it be known that he isn't scared of a jump in competition, whether it be a move up in weight to face James Toney at 168 or continuing to rise the middleweight ranks.
Next, James Toney has indicated that he is going to abandon his 160-pound championship to continue to fight 168 pounds, win or lose against Iran Barkley. Where does that leave Roy Jones?
Well, that leaves Roy Jones looking for whatever's next, James Toney says things like, but Roy Jones doesn't fight anybody, he's fighting bums. And look, he just fought Glenn Wolfe 8 months ago and went 12 rounds with him. So, I ain't sure what James Toney's trying to do. When I see him, he never says any of these things to me.
And the late bloomer Bernard Hopkins, while not being as heralded as Jones was able to build up a record of 22 wins, 1 loss, and 16 knockouts. But after a war with Gilbert Baptiste, Hopkins would also look to up his rank, setting up a fight with Roy in May of 1993 for the vacant IBF middleweight title. The two up-and-comers would have a good battle, but in the end, Roy Jones would come out on top, getting the unanimous decision victory. In the time between this fight and the next, the two fighters were going to cement themselves at the top of boxing and elevate their rivalry even more. In November of 1994, Jones would prove all the naysayers wrong after beating James Toney in the move up to super middleweight. While in December of 1994, while trying to pick up the pieces after losing to Jones, Hopkins will face another setback after a draw in his fight with Segundo Mercado for the IBF world title. But Bernard Hopkins would bounce back in April of 1995, getting a TKO victory in a rematch with Mercado, claiming the IBF title in the process. By 1997, both fighters would be champions in their respective divisions, with Jones eventually moving up to light heavyweight as Hopkins would stick around the middleweight division. They would continue their individual dominance over the years as talks of a rematch would start to heat up. And in 2002, after a doubleheader broadcast by HBO, where both would win their respective matches in each of their own home states, we would see the rivalry start to reach a fever pitch, with them being able to actually speak to each other live.
This is going to happen.
I never said don't want
both of you want to make it happen regardless and find a way to make it happen.
Right split your ass is toast. I don't give a damn about no fight. Well, hey, I'm the champ. I'm the champ. I'm the right heavyweight champ of the world. You want to try me for my title?
Who I am?
You want to try me for my title?
All right.
60-40, you get your ass kicked. 60-40, you get your ass tore up. 60-40, you get your ass kicked. 60-40, I kick your ass. Well, I kick your ass. 60-40, I kick your ass. 60-40, I tear your ass.
Negotiate any further here.
You don't want to fight.
You have a fight. You have a fight in front of you.
After this heated moment, talks about this fight would dissolve and the rematch wouldn't materialize until years later, after both fighters would face adversity in their career. After both fighters in their later years and past their prime would suffer multiple losses, they would finally, after years of anticipation, schedule a fight for early 2010. All they would have to do was win each of their fights before the date, and we finally get to see what we've been waiting for over 10 years at this point. But the fight would be put in jeopardy after Jones would suffer a first-round knockout at the hands of Danny Green. Luckily, Hopkins did his part in beating his opponent, so the fight would go on and be scheduled for April 3rd, 2010. The fight would be a flop commercially, only being bought by like 150,000 homes, showing that the hype had died down considerably. Hopkins would end up dominating the fight, getting through multiple fouls that Jones would commit, showing that he aged like fine wine, and Jones may have aged more like milk. Hopkins would get the win, but this match would leave more to the imagination as to what might have happened if these two faced in their respective primes. But I guess that's what video games are for, right?